Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Carnotto. President-elect Donald Trump announced that former wrestling CEO and administrator of the Small Business Administration, Linda McMahon, will be his Secretary of Education. Joining me to dig into this story is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, some people may be familiar with Linda McMahon, but as is often the case with cabinet picks, they aren't always big names that everyone knows. So who is Linda McMahon and what is her background?
Yeah, so her background really is from wrestling. She has a stake in wrestling, was a CEO with WWE, which is kind of an interesting education pick, right? I think that's something you got to remember with Donald Trump is I think a lot of his supporters really do value that he is a political outsider. That's something that they're looking for, and that was kind of the theme of the first, his first run, right, in 2016 was Draining the Swamp. I think that resonated with a lot of people who, kind of see Washington, D.C. as being filled with people who are, lifetime, bureaucrats, politicians, that kind of thing. So I don't think that it's really that unusual for Donald Trump to, go to the business side of things and try to see people who have run successful businesses. He also, in announcing McMahon for the position, you really, touted some of her other, background and experience in education. For example, on the Connecticut Board of Education, where they, there was some oversight of the public education in the state, and also, for a university in Connecticut as well. The Sacred Heart University there as a member of the Board of Trustees. So there are, some of the leadership there, but that is her background as WWE with husband Vince McMahon. So, I mean, if you're, maybe like there's some different memes even of Vince McMahon out on the internet. And I think so like that might be some people's closest interactions before the announcement. Right. But if you're, a Trump insider, you're probably aware of, her recent influence on the campaign. For example, I think she's been, a prominent leader in the transition team toward the White House here in the next few months. She's also been a board chair at the America First Policy Institute, which again, is, some of these conservative think tanks, some of these like more populist focused, like toward the Trump organizations, some of the Trump agenda. So I think that, that's been a recent shift there away from some of the business side toward the politics, toward the policy sector. So that in a nutshell, that's some of the interesting things to bring up, I think, about Linda and her background.
And she did have a little bit of involvement of education policy on a state level.
Yeah, right. So that's what the Connecticut Board of Education. So that oversaw the public education in the state, right? That's steering the direction there of the public schools, including that high school system, the technical high school system. According to Trump's statement, he basically said, "This is why I picked her. This is what I like." I think it's pretty. There's a great piece from Frederick Hess from AEI, and he kind of was talking about how quickly a lot of different publications even started going back and looking at her background and trying to figure out was she truthful in everything that she did. And like the Washington Post, for example, Hess points out was did reports on like the scandal about her saying that she had a bachelor's degree and that like earned a teaching credential. But then there was like a discrepancy. They were arguing, and it was that she had like a French degree with like a teaching certification or something. So that's kind of the scandal, this quote scandal that they're trying to unearth there. So I think that's like there's been some criticism of the media and how it covers, Trump's education pick versus Biden's education pick, Miguel Cardona, who's currently education secretary. According to Frederick Hess, like that's something that he's brought up is that there's been a little bit of a different like treatment there, which I think is pretty interesting. So, that's something I think to be, just kind of aware of is how things are covered and how things are like brought up.
And you mentioned a little bit about Trump highlighting why he chose her. What were some of the things that he highlighted and some of the promises he sort of alluded to in his announcement?
Yeah, so he said McMahon had been working hard to achieve universal school choice, like at her time at America First Policy Institute and at America First Works. So like in these different, conservative leaning political organizations. So, an advocate of school choice. He also reiterated his promise to abolish or dissolve the Department of Education. I mean, that's something that he has said repeatedly on the campaign trail. And when I reached out to the transition team, that's something that they said, we will do what we've promised. And so, again, campaigns promise a lot. Does that always pan out? Is there always the political, capital to get everything done? That's still to be determined, right? But they're adamant, like we are going to do this. So I think in announcing Department of Education secretary, it's they're also saying, we're going to spearhead the efforts to send education back to the states. So de-emphasizing the Department of Education, I think that's kind of the buried news, I think, in the announcement, is that she's spearheading this effort to try to radically redesign education. So if the Trump administration, it looks like they're serious about this, they're trying to move education back to the states. So like there'd be less of an apparatus from the federal government. And it's kind of, I asked them, like, how do you do that? Like, what does that look like? Didn't get a response back. Because again, I think that the details, are going to be very important about how that actually looks. Like, how do you keep states accountable for funding? How do you, what kinds of things should the Department of Education be doing? But I think that's something that, Trump supporters, want generally. They want to have, schools that work well and maybe don't have sort of like a top-down kind of, this is what we're going to tell schools to do sort of thing. So it's very interesting to announce your Department of Education secretary, and then also say, like, we're going to dissolve the Department of Education, right? So I think that's kind of the tension here. And so saying, I think that might be like a great way to bridge that, is by saying that she's going to spearhead this effort to sort of reduce the influence of the agency and send education back to the states, which has been a Trump campaign promise, and that's something that they said they're going to do.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.